Hello everyone, and welcome to War in Middle-earth, The War of the Ring, a multi-part series on the final and most important conflict of the Third Age, where new heroes would rise and old villains would fall. In this episode, we look at the Siege of Gondor, perhaps the darkest days of the Third Age. With armies marching forth from the Moraman, Minas Morgul, and the lands of the south, Sauron is determined to destroy his age-old rival in one crushing blow. In the previous episode, we discussed the calm before the storm, or as others aptly put it, the deep breath before the plunge. We ended the episode at the beginning of the 10th of March, known as the Dawnless Day, due to the fumes from Mount Doom blocking out the sun. This is Sauron's sorcery, with the dual aim of demoralizing his enemies, whilst also providing cover for his orcs, so that they don't have to march and fight under the sun. His preparations complete, Sauron unleashes his first two armies from Mordor. The first issues forth from the Moranen, the Black Gate. This is a smaller army, numbering over 6,000 orcs and Easterlings, and its objective is to capture the island fortress of Caer Andros and then march into Anorion, where it will build fortifications on the Great West Road. The purpose of these fortifications will be to either stop or delay an army from Rohan, should it attempt to ride to Gondor's aid. The second army is the dreaded Morgul host, led by the Witch King of Angmar himself. Although most of the army is made up of orcs, they are soon joined by a large force of Haradrim at the crossroads, as well as a number of Easterlings and Variags from Khand. Their objective is to be Sauron's main hammer that will strike Gondor, force the crossing of the Anduin, take Osgiliath, and then besiege and capture Minas Tirith. The size of the Morgul host is unknown. The Haradrim are the only force that is numbered, at 18,000, but given this army outnumbered Gondor's defenders at Osgiliath by 10 to 1, the entire army presumably numbered 60,000 at the minimum. Late in the day, Faramir and 3 companions attempt to ride to Minas Tirith. I say attempt because upon reaching the Pelennor fields, they are attacked by 5 of the Nazgul, who are mounted on fell beasts. Faramir's companions struggle to control their horses, and some are thrown to the ground, but Faramir refuses to leave them behind. They are only saved when Gandalf rides forth from Minas Tirith and drives the Nazgul away using shafts of white light from his hand. That evening, Faramir discusses recent events with Denethor and Gandalf, and Pippin is present too. When Denethor is eventually able to speak, he has something of a meltdown, basically stating that he wishes Faramir had died instead of Boromir, and that Faramir may have doomed Gondor by allowing Frodo to go free in Ithilien. After being scolded by Gandalf, Denethor eventually relents, and discussion about Gondor's defences are postponed until the morning of the 11th due to Faramir's wariness. On the morning of the 11th, Denethor summons his council, including the captains who have arrived from Gondor's southern fiefdoms. They quickly come to an agreement on one rather obvious fact. Gondor lacks the strength to go on the offensive, and must wait for Sauron's inevitable assault. The next point of discussion is the defences along the River Anduin. Denethor is adamant that the garrison at Osgiliath be strengthened. Prince Imrahil also notes that Caer Andros must be defended too, and if their northern flank falls, then Rohan may be cut off. Denethor acknowledges that, but says that nothing can be spared for Caer Andros, and that he needs a brave captain to take command of the defence of Osgiliath. Faramir nominates himself, and Denethor readily agrees. Faramir then sets off towards Osgiliath with any man that is willing to go. Now, all the remaining people in Minas Tirith can do is wait. And the wait is dreadful. On the night of the 11th, news comes from the front that the Morgul host is nearing Osgiliath. The Second Battle of Osgiliath is joined that night. The Morgul host swarms across the river in a fleet of barges that have been built in secret. The strength of Faramir's garrison is unknown, maybe 4,000 to 5,000 at most, but they are greatly outnumbered, and although the Morgul host takes heavy losses during the crossing, it's far less than Faramir had hoped for. A big factor in this is the Witch King of Angmar, whose presence alone is enough to crush the morale of the defenders. Sometime early on the 12th, the people in Minas Tirith learn that Faramir has retreated to the Ramessekor, abandoning Osgiliath and the river crossing to the enemy. At this point, Gandalf rides forth, deciding that his presence would be better served on the front lines. Osgiliath is not the only Gondorian possession to be lost on the 12th. In the north, Sauron's force from the Moranen successfully captures Caer Andros at some point during the night. As planned, they do not strike south towards Minas Tirith, and instead begin taking up positions along the Great West Road. Caer Andros' surviving defenders retreat southwards, Their outlook grim as they realise that Gondor's northern flank has collapsed, and Rohan is now cut off. But it isn't just Gondor's northern flank that has collapsed. Their southern flank has too. On, or just before the 12th, Pelargir is captured by the Corsairs of Umbar. Let's talk about the southern front for a bit. Around the 10th, the Corsairs and the Haradrim's invasion of southern Gondor begins. Gondor's fleet is either destroyed at the Ethir Anduin or at Pelargir, or it retreats westwards towards Belfalas. Either way, the Corsairs win the passage of the Anduin and gain supremacy over Gondor's southeastern coastline. As I just stated, the main portion of their fleet sails north and captures Pelargir sometime before the 13th of March, but they also land a significant amount of troops on the coast, and these troops march on the town of Linhir at the junction of the rivers Gilrain and Cerny. On the 11th, battle breaks out at the town. Some of Gondor's southern forces led by Lord Angbor of Lamadon on one side, and a host of Corsairs and Haradrim on the other. We will return to the southern front in the next episode. Back at Minas Tirith, the situation continues to worsen for the Gondorians. Shortly after dawn on the 13th, the people in Minas Tirith can only watch in horror as the ground shakes and blasts of fire erupt in the distance. The Ramessekor has held for a day, but no longer, as the Morgul host begins blasting holes in the wall. With his position compromised, Faramir must now retreat to Minas Tirith, lest his soldiers get surrounded and destroyed on the fields. The first soldiers to retreat are the wounded, arriving around mid-morning in a line of wagons, accompanied by Gandalf and a handful of horsemen. Gandalf brings news from the front. Faramir is commanding the rear guard, unwilling to let the retreat of his soldiers turn into a rout. However, Gandalf is not optimistic, believing it only a matter of time until that happens. He suggests that Denethor organise a sortie of horsemen, just in case Faramir is in danger of being overrun. Denethor waves away this suggestion, saying that he had already thought of it. Gandalf also brings more bad news. Caer Andros has fallen, its survivors having reached them earlier that day. But Denethor informs him that he was already aware of this, probably having seen it through the Palantir. The battle soon spills into the Pelennor fields. The Morgul host rolls forward, burning the farms and townlands as they go. From the walls, the smoke and gloom from the sky makes it hard to see, so no one is unsure of how the battle is unfolding. Small groups of tired or wounded men continue to hurry through the gate, many of them fleeing as if closely pursued. It's near to dusk when the main retreat comes into view, a mass of men marching towards the city, held together by Faramir's will. Out of the gloom behind them gallops a small company of horsemen, all that remains of Faramir's rear guard. To the defenders of the city, it seems like Faramir's forces will make it back. Yet even as Faramir's forces are less than 400 meters from the gate, a company of Haradrim horsemen falls upon the rear guard. The Nazgul begin swooping again, and all of a sudden, the retreat begins to turn into a rout, and men begin to break off, throwing down their weapons and fleeing wildly towards the gate. It seems for a moment that the disaster is about to turn into a catastrophe, but then Denethor unleashes his sortie. A company of horsemen, led by Gandalf and Prince Imrahil and many of his swan knights, charges forth from beneath the gate, crashing into the Morgul vanguard. Inspired by the ferocity of the attack, those retreating Gondorians suddenly turn and join the assault, and the sortie becomes an onslaught. The Morgul vanguard is scattered and destroyed. The Nazgul are once again driven away by Gandalf, and for the first time since the invasion began, the Gondorians have themselves a victory. However, Denethor soon gives the order for the attack to be halted, as fresh enemy forces continue to pour into the fields. The retreating soldiers once again form rank and march through the gate. The bystanders cheer them, but these soldiers have little to cheer about. About a third of them have perished since the fighting began on the 11th, and last of all to come through the gate is Prince Imrahil, bearing the grievously wounded body of Faramir. He had been struck by an arrow whilst fighting a mounted Haradrim champion, and only the charge of the Dol Amroth Knights had saved him. He is taken up to Denethor in the White Tower, and seeing his fallen son is the last straw for Denethor. He breaks and abandons his role as the leader of the city. The city is now surrounded. The last Gondorians to flee through the gate are those arriving from the north gate of the Ramessekor. They bring the dire news that the northern road has been cut off, and that the Rohirrim cannot come. The defenders will be on their own. Their number is unknown, but I expect that they numbered at least 5,000. Through the night and through the morning of the 14th, the orcs get to work on their siege. They spread through the fields, burning farms and houses, slaying men wherever they can find them, and building their unsightly camps. They dig trenches, fill them with magical fires, and bring forth their siege engines behind them. The Gondorians lack their own siege engines that can adequately disrupt the work of the orcs, but they are confident nevertheless. The outer wall of Minas Tirith is made of black stone, the same black stone that built Orthanc, and it's almost completely impervious to damage. But the Morgul host is led by the Witch King, and he's not an idiot. He's not going to try and bring down the wall. Instead, the siege engines launch their shots high over the wall, and the missiles burst into flames as they hit the ground. Soon, much of the first level of the city is on fire, and many of the defenders find themselves in a battle to douse the flames. But fire is not the only weapon of the enemy. A hail of smaller stones soon fly over, but to the horror of the defenders, these are not stones, but the heads of the slain, those who fell in the fighting at Osgiliath, the Rammus, or in the retreat over the Pelennor. Whilst it does not do physical damage to the city or its soldiers, it serves to further weaken the morale of the defenders. With the cries of the swooping Nazgul overhead, and without the leadership of their steward, it isn't long before many of the defenders break, abandoning the wall and fleeing to the upper levels. With many of the soldiers having fled, the fires soon grow out of control, and those remaining on the walls are cut off, unable to flee even if they wanted to. The only beacon of hope for the men of Gondor is Gandalf, Prince Imrahil and his Swan Knights, who stride from citadel to gate, north wall to south wall, rallying and inspiring the defenders as they go. At midnight, the Witch King launches his assault. Companies of orcs rush towards the wall and gate, and behind them, the siege towers slowly roll forward, pulled by great beasts and the Haradrim Mumakil. The defenders loose their arrows, and at the gates, where the defense is still strong, piles of dead orcs soon build up beneath the walls. Some of the siege towers are smashed to pieces or set aflame, but some find the walls, and the defenders soon find themselves in hand-to-hand combat. Despite being heavily outnumbered, the defenders manage to hold the Morgul host on the walls, and none of the enemy make it into the city proper. Unknown to the defenders, the assault upon the wall is just a distraction. The Witch King has an ace up his sleeve, and he's about to play it. Grond, the Hammer of the Underworld, named after Morgoth's weapon from the First Age. A massive, 30-meter long battering ram, held by strong metal chains and pulled by great beasts. The defenders' attempts to set the ram alight prove to be fruitless, and soon Grond has reached the gate. Mountain trolls then man the ram, and prepare to use it against Minas Tirith's impenetrable doors. But it isn't Grond alone that will make the assault. Finally, the Witch King of Angmar, the Black Captain, commander of the Morgul host, reveals himself. He calmly rides forward, unafraid of any arrow or stone, and the terror of his presence alone is so great that for a moment the defenders pause and the sounds of battle seem to cease. Then the Witch King raises his sword, shouting powerful words of sorcery in some forgotten language. 3 times he yells, and 3 times Grond slams against the gate. On the third, the gate bursts open with a flash of lightning, the Witch King's spells having worked its magic. The Witch King then rides in alone, the first enemy to ever step foot into the city of Gondor, and the defenders flee in terror, all except for Gandalf. He alone defies the Witch King. "You cannot enter here. Go back to the abyss prepared for you. Go back. Fall into the nothingness that awaits you and your master. Go." The Witch King replies, old fool, this is my hour. Do you not know death when you see it? Die now, and curse in vain." He raises his sword, and it bursts into flame. What the outcome of this contest would have been, we do not know. At this moment, dawn arrives, signalled by the crowing of a rooster, and answering it was the sound of horns, coming from the north. Just as it looked like defeat was assured for Gondor, the Rohirrim arrive. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, or at least found it interesting. As you can see, there are a lot of differences between the book version of events and the movie version of events. No suicidal Faramir charge, and the only enemy to properly enter the city is the Witch King. In the next episode, we go straight to the Battle of Pelennor Fields and the events that concerned both Aragorn and the Rohirrim's arrival to the city. So, thanks, farewell, and remember, you should have left with the women and children.